Alright, so this is going to be a video on essentially breaking down my self-typing as ESFP based on my life history, breaking my life up into quarters. It's approximately like 20 to 18 to 20 year quarters. And as I mentioned in the previous video in this series, my first quarter was an extroverted sensation quarter, or a sensation quarter to use personality hacker terminology. This is this is largely based, or almost exclusively based, on the diagnostic history I have with different disorders, I guess. Disorders. Because as I'm going to see it and explain it, hopefully I think that these disorders, I mean, they might still be disorders, and still might be an accurate classification or word for them, but I think that they're indicative of these fundamental psychological processes that are cognitive functions. So, the sensory processing disorder as extroverted sensation, why do I think that's what that was? I was diagnosed with the sensory processing disorder when I was fairly young, had to go through occupational therapy for it. Essentially what a sensory processing disorder is the interpretation is that, or the diagnosis, that your body, or you as the person who's been diagnosed with this disorder, has difficulty, or you have difficulty integrating multimodal sensory input and responding to your environment, your sensory environment, in an appropriate fashion. Not appropriate fashion, but like in an effective fashion, I suppose. Maybe that's close enough. I'm going to look more into the history of this and see kind of like what the impetus was for me kind of getting into this occupational therapy that had me working on sensory processing issues. But that was definitely something I remember doing. I'd go into this office or hospital or clinical setting, and I'd be doing all these tactile or proprioceptive tasks for an hour or two, which I think I'd actually like, because I was like, oh, this is just like sports or whatever, you know? So why do I think that's extroverted sensation? Because I think extroverted sensation is essentially using your body as a tool to interact with and understand your environment, and essentially using all the senses of the body in order to understand and interact with that environment. So essentially, when you have extroverted sensation first, you're probably going to have some sort of, or you may have, it's a better way to say, you may have some sort of diagnosis in the first quarter of your life that matches some sort of tactile, proprioceptive, sensory processing issue, like I had. So what that looked like for me was a sensory processing disorder, but sensory processing disorder is also diagnosed along with like ADHD or autism from time to time. So it might be either of those for people. But for me, it was a sensory processing disorder, and I guess I've already said it, but I just think that that's indicative of extroverted sensation based on the sensory processing disorder being an issue integrating real-time multimodal sensory input. And essentially why I think this is my primary function as opposed to, let's say, an inferior function that just cropped up at that time as a weakness is because you see people, I'll get into this with the mood disorder one next, but you see people essentially making strengths out of their weaknesses, or what supports you crosses you, across you supports you type stuff. Essentially for me, I think this is something that I figured out and kind of got good at, essentially, because it was initially a difficult thing to deal with, apparently. But this is analogous to the biological concept of hormesis, which is essentially when there's a stressor on an organism, they respond to that stressor, and that actually benefits that area of life that that organism is dealing with in that stressed state. So that's why I think that it's actually a strength as opposed to a weakness of mine. And that would be an extroverted sensation primary function for me, or a sensation primary function for me, to use personality hacker terminology. Next video I'll be making is going to be on my mood disorder and why I think that's introverted feeling, so stay tuned for that one next. Thanks for watching.